Welcome to WagerTalk Sweet 16, and we've got a focused game for this particular video, guys, and it's Kansas State taking on Kentucky. Kentucky laying about 5.5, total right around 138.5. Just a week ago, before the dance kicked off, we had John Calipari whining about getting a number 5 seed. I don't think he's worrying or whining too much at this point about that particular seed for his troops. They draw Kansas State on Thursday, and that's not to take anything away from Kansas State, but all of a sudden the path got a little bit easier, relatively speaking, to get to the Final Four. No Arizona, no Virginia. They will get the winner. The winner of this game will play Loyola Chicago, Nevada. The winner of that game, if Kentucky beats Kansas State, then obviously they're going to be a favorite again, so he can quit complaining about that number 5 seed that he got. We have a Manhattan night right here on the panel. She, of course, being Kelly Stewart of Kansas State fame, a big K-State backer in case you've been hiding under a rock for the past 5 or 6 years. Bruce Weber was outstanding at Southern Illinois. I was a big Missouri Valley guy. I used to bet the Missouri Valley way back as far as the 80s when I'd pick out one conference to just hone in on for an entire season. Bruce Weber was great at Carbondale, makes the change, goes to Champaign, has one really good season at Illinois with somebody else's players, doesn't go so well after that. Comes to Kansas State. I don't know, maybe I undervalued him a bit. I am not the biggest Bruce Weber fan, and I think Calipari gets a bucket of value in this particular matchup.
It's tough because I am not the biggest Bruce Weber fan either, and in his defense, I did not put them in the Sweet 16, as Ralph joked. He put them in the Sweet 16 of the NIT. I didn't quite go that far, but that being said, I have to give credit where credit's due. Granted, they did get to face UMBC instead of 1 seed Virginia. A few things scare me about this game. One thing, when Preston walked into the green room earlier, is Dean Wade playing? Well, we don't know if Dean Wade's playing. Right. Supposedly, he was ready to go prior to the UMBC game, didn't need him, so to speak. Maybe looking ahead, they knew that they were the favorite, obviously, in that game. I'm a little nervous. Obviously, he may not be 100%. Another thing to consider is K-State has never beaten Kentucky. 0-9 lifetime. Bruce Weber's 0-1 against Kentucky in Manhattan. And this Kentucky team, like you said, is very undervalued, so to speak. Sure. This season, we've seen them. They started off just absolutely atrocious against the number. Just every game I would flip to, and I'm like, why am I even watching this bad Kentucky Wildcats team, which I guess we should say in their defense, they're a young team. We're not used to seeing them ever have to struggle. They've just been dominant for so long. It took them
longer to get there this year.
Right, but now they're here. In their last 10 games, 81.6 points per game. They're overset 9 of the last 10 games. I'm nervous. This K-State defense didn't get as much credit as the offense just got ragged on pretty bad in the UMBC game. I think this defense is the better defense here, so I am going to take the Wildcats and the points. I'm hesitant a little bit. As a K-State fan, I would never bet them as a favorite. I told everybody, I'm like, you can't bet Bruce Weber as a favorite. But this is the same team that went into Baylor as an 8.5-point dog and won in Waco. Like, this team is so Jekyll and Hyde. I'm a little nervous because I'm not sure what we're going to get. I'm going to fade the public here, though, cheer on my Wildcats, and hope they can get the outright victory. Maybe we get a 6 on this game, and all is right in the world.
Obviously, we're not surprised that they got by UMBC. I stayed away from the game. The number was just a little tiny too steep for me, but not enough to jump in on a 16 seed that just pulled off the stunner. But the game against Creighton did surprise me. I didn't play that game either. I think I had a free play and opinion at WagerTalk on Creighton in that game. What surprised me the most about that, Marco, was that Marcus Foster might have had his worst game since transferring from K-State to Creighton. He was horrible. So they had a Creighton team that was completely out of whack, and you got to give some of that credit to K-State. I think Creighton shot like 33% in that game, one of the better shooting teams in college basketball. And then they draw a 16 seed off of, probably the biggest celebration they've ever had. University of Maryland backup college is what the Terrapins were calling them at one point, not any longer. But in this particular game, our good friend Mark Dufty over at Jerry's Nugget, standalone book, Wise Shop, they had this as high as 7 at one point for this game. It's 6 there right now, 5.5s in most books.
Yeah, I think the public's going to look at this and see that Kansas State struggled. Sunday, if they didn't have that 10-point drought, Baltimore, Maryland, they're in that ball game. They still were in it even with that 10-minute. They scored 2 points in 10 minutes in the second half,
right.
And still had an opportunity to do it. And they were playing on such a big stage after the upset. Everybody was, what are they going to have come Sunday? So give them credit for showing up. And I think it gives us line value here. And I think this line will creep up come game day. We're filming on Tuesday. We got a couple days before this game's played. When the public actually does get involved, I think they're going to be on Kentucky because they're going to look at a Kentucky team that put up 95 points in their last game. But they were playing a Buffalo team that likes to play up-tempo. I was on Kentucky in that game. You don't want to play the same style that the other team plays much better than you and has the better athletes. The game before that, Kentucky struggled a little bit with Davidson. Davidson was a senior-laden ball club that was able to stay with them, not make stupid mistakes, didn't try to run with them. And Kansas State is definitely not going to run with them in this ball game. You know, you look at Kentucky, we talked about them, they're a slow start, but boy, they are playing well now. They've won 9 of their last 10 games. The only game they lost was the meaningless game at the end of the season, the regular season against Florida, when the SEC game title was already decided. Auburn had everything locked up, so they had nothing to play for. I like Kansas State in this one. I'll give you something. If you're looking at the total, Kentucky has gone over in 9 of its last 10 games during this run. But if you like Kansas State, I think it's a correlated parlay. You got to lean to the under if you like Kansas State. I think the two are going to go hand in hand because I don't see Kansas State stay in this if it's a high-scoring game.
Ralph, I looked at my numbers before last week's games were played, and I would have made Kentucky 7.5 points better than Kansas State on this particular court.
I have Kentucky about 8.5.
Okay.
You're at Atlanta. You're going to have the SEC crowd. You look at Wildcats' last 4 games, they're averaging over 55%. They're allowing under 39%. You have complete dominance. We heard Calipari all year. I've got a young team. We're going to learn how to play defense. I got a young team. We're going to learn how to play defense. They now know how to play defense. You look at what K-State's done against top 20 offenses in the Big 12. That's Kansas, TCU, and West Virginia. 0-2 against West Virginia, losses by 8 and 38. 0-3 against Kansas, losses by 1, 4, and 16. 2-1 against TCU, 1 at home, 1 in overtime in the Big 12 tournament. They don't have the offense to keep up with Kentucky. Kentucky's defense is going to shut them down. Best bet for me, Wildcats.
Nice, best
bet. Kentucky Wildcats.
Yeah, well, nice try.
You get out with the winner.
Yeah. I've got the Wildcats.
You can't push on 5.5, can you?
That's true. I can lose, though. I figure a way to.
For me, so I actually thought the number was a little high at 6, but I didn't have it in me to actually bet Kansas State for reasons we talked about, obviously Wade being questionable or at the very least banged up some. And I'll be one to admit, they looked horrible against UMBC, and Kentucky's rolling. Like, why am I going to bet against a Kentucky team that's just crushing? So for me, I didn't bet the +6, but I'm not surprised it came down a half point. I will say I did bet Kentucky for people that have this option. -101 to win the region. My true line was like -120, so I thought there was some value there. And I just think they're going to win, and then they're going to be pretty big favorites, 5.5 to 6.5 point favorites, whether it's Nevada or Loyola Chicago. Sure. So in that range, I think at 110 or better is worth a bet. So for people watching, they can get that. And the other look, I think the best bet in the game is probably under 138.5. I agree 100% with what Ralph said about Kentucky's defense. And Kansas State, it's not that hard to score on Creighton. And it shouldn't be that hard to score on UMBC, but they couldn't. I think there was that almost 11-minute stretch Marco mentioned where UMBC scored 2 points and Kansas State's lead increased like 1.
Yeah.
Like one total point over an 11-minute stretch where UMBC scored 2. They had 17 turnovers. They were 1 of 13 from 3 was part of it. But I just can't count on them to score. And I think now they're playing against a defense in Kentucky's that's been elite now for a few weeks. And in the way Kentucky plays, they don't shoot a lot of threes. The game's a little slower, and obviously Kansas State's going to try to slow the game down themselves. So the number for me is 2 points too high anyways. If Wade's banged up, he's not playing as well, or maybe he doesn't even play. Anyway, I think there's a lot of indicators pointing to an under bet. So that's my favorite bet in the game, or the Kentucky region bet if you can get that.
Good stuff. Couple of unders, couple of K-States. I'm shocked you're going with the Wildcats of K-State. But anyway, good stuff, guys. Don't forget $9 Manic Mondays. Any package, any daily package on Mondays are $9 from a handicapper of your choice, and you can purchase more than one, obviously. If you like what you see on these videos, be sure to click the thumbs up button. We'll be back with more. Marco and I are going to switch spots here, and we're going to talk about 3 more games and also a featured game from Friday's Sweet 16 action. Stick around.